As a people and a nation, we must carefully investigate the coup d'etat of 15 July. Not only those who have committed this treason, but also the forces behind it.
Turkey is still reeling from last month's failed coup. What does it mean for the embattled country's relationship with the West and beyond? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. More than 1 million people attended a pro-democracy rally in Istanbul on Sunday. It was the first time in years that Turkey's president and prime minister were joined by opposition leaders, all united in denouncing last month's attempted coup. Since then, more than 70,000 people in the military, judiciary, civil service and education have either been arrested, suspended or placed under investigation. And then there's this. Beyond the domestic fallout lies newly strained relations with the United States and a possible rapprochement with Russia. Later, we'll talk with a Turkish journalist, a policy analyst, and an expert on political violence. But we begin in Istanbul with CCTV's Natalie Carney. And Natalie, bring us up to date on the latest from Turkey since that failed coup. What more do we know, and how successful has the Erdogan government been in consolidating its power?
Well, I guess it really depends on which perspective you're looking at all this from. The purges, the detentions and the arrests do continue here. Up to date, we've seen that 16,000 people have been officially arrested. And as of late, the Istanbul Public Prosecutor's Office have issued arrest warrants for 34 members of the Fethullah Gulen network, who the government accuses of being the mastermind of the failed military coup. 15 of these people are already in custody with potential connections to the coup. However, the main reason for their arrest warrants is due to an incident back in January of 2014, one that the government fears of national security. So we are seeing that these sweeps are expanding a little bit more than just to those that the government perceived to be behind the failed coup attempt. So these the perceived excessiveness of all this is worrying many, particularly in the international community, but also because we don't know how successful yet all these purges and all these detentions and all these arrests have been. But I should note that those that have been cleared, the process is continuing. Their jobs have been reinstated. They have, re-entered society as civilians of this country. As far as the consolidation of power, there's no doubt that Erdogan has been able to soften some of the opposition voices in the country through all this process and has been able to consolidate some power, particularly with the armed forces. But it's definitely worth noting and stressing that this consolidation of power really has been able to substantially lessen the influence of the Gulen network here in Turkey and the threat that it poses and has posed to this country for many, many years. And this is something that the West, many people here feel, is not fully appreciative of. And also, too, even prior to the coup, there was a lot of support for Erdogan taking more power simply to get things done in the country. The parliament was so divided on issues that nothing was really getting passed. So there is a lot of support. While it might look excessive again to the West, there's a lot of support domestically here for the measures that the government is taking to crack down on this Gulenist network that it deems a quote-unquote cancer to the country.
Now, Natalie, the other significant development on Tuesday, President Erdogan traveled to St. Petersburg to meet with the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. And this comes at a time, after Turkey shot down that Russian jet near the Syrian border back in November. So with this meeting now, have these two countries effectively mended ties?
Well, they've definitely agreed to work together towards reinstating their pre-crisis relationship, that be economically, that be politically, in every sphere that they did work prior to the crisis in November when Turkey shot down a Russian jet over its border with Syria. But this does come at a very convenient time politically, of course, as Turkey's relationship with the West is deteriorating, for one, over the West's post-coup response, as well as the U.S.'s delay in extraditing Gulen, and even before that, with its relations with the EU over the refugee deal. So it does come at a very convenient time for both Ankara and Moscow. But there's also the economic aspect that is substantially beneficial for Turkey. Turkey's economy was quite damaged by the sanctions placed upon it by Russia. The coup, for instance, as well, cost the country, some economists are saying, upwards of $100 billion US. So this is great that Turkey is going to be able to sort of refill its budget, so to speak, going forward with these renewed economic ties with Russia. Some economists are saying that Turkey could gain upwards of $10 billion US in the next 2 years by reinstating these relations. The two leaders have also pledged to reinstate their trade target of $100 billion US. So all this makes for good news for Turkey.
Thanks, Natalie. That's CCTV's Natalie Carney reporting from Istanbul. Joining us from Moscow to talk about the situation in Turkey is Alexei Klebnikov. He's a senior editor with Russia Direct, a publication offering analysis and perspective on international issues. With us here in Washington is Mustafa Gurbuz. He's a political sociologist and the author of a new book, Rival Kurdish Movements in Turkey. And joining us from Istanbul is a journalist and commentator with the Daily Sabah, Zeynep Jane Kando. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Zeynep, let me start with you, and let's start with the events of this past weekend. There was a major demonstration in Turkey, in Istanbul, more than 1 million people. It included President, the Prime Minister, even opposition members were in that demonstration. Has the attempted coup actually had the effect of uniting Turks?
It was very surprising that a coup had the effect of uniting Turks. I think it was a great benefit from the coup. We mustn't underplay the fact that over 200 people died, thousands were injured. But the fact that the country came together to thwart the coup and continue to come together to stand off any attempts to upset the democratic traditions of the country is very important. You said over 1 million. It was recorded it was over 5 million people that day. Actually, over 8 million people tried to get into the square, but 2 million weren't able to and were turned back. People were on boats because the boats were unable to dock. So it was a huge turnout. The opposition leaders and the president and the prime minister all coming together and giving messages of unity, all being equally cheered by all members of society. It was a very, very important day, a red letter day for Turkey, I would say.
Right, Mustafa, so we have this huge demonstration in Turkey in support of democracy in the country. At the same time, the government has launched something of a crackdown in Turkey. More than 70,000 people have been arrested or are under investigation right now. The president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is talking of reintroducing the death penalty. Is here using the coup as an attempt to crack down on all forms of dissent in Turkey?
Well, that's the worry, actually, and it was from the very moment the July 15 coup attempt was making Mr. Erdogan's according to some, a march toward one-man rule in Turkey, undermining checks and balances. Of course, winning over the coup attempt is a great deal for the Turkish democracy, but also Turkish democracy would be about the journalists and academics and others now suffering under the emergency laws that we would see in Turkey after the successful coups. Like we can compare the numbers. Even the numbers are comparable after weeks after the 1980 coup. So if it would be a successful coup, what would be the outcome? Yes, it would be a disaster. But if under such conditions, we are discussing about the rights of academics, rights of journalists, and rights of teachers. There are 20,000 people in the ministry, only the Ministry of Education. So we have big questions about the Mr. Erdogan's ambition to become the executive president of Turkey.
Zainab, that's an important point that Mustafa raises here. That is the motive behind what the president is doing. Is he ambitious? Is he trying to stamp out all dissent, opposition in Turkey?
First of all, I think to just talk about the president in this situation is awfully reductionist. There is a government in Turkey. It is the government and the president together who declared the state of emergency. Any country which has a coup, which injures thousands and kills hundreds, which attempts to assassinate the president, drop bombs on the parliament, is well within its rights and actually should declare a state of emergency. The academics that are being suspended. First of all, they're being suspended with 2/3 of their pay, so this is something that's often overlooked. It is terribly worrying, of course, when there's any restriction on freedoms, but if these academics are linked in any way to the coup, which is what is being discovered through evidence, then they must be removed from their positions, because as we know from the West, academics, if they're not serving the purpose of greater knowledge and teaching and seeking greater information, but are rather working to radicalize youth, then that's a very dangerous thing. And this is something that all academics are taking on seriously. There have been many letters written to the West by academics who have been suspended or not suspended, saying that they support this effort, in that they want academia to be the place that it should be, a place of learning and education. The state of emergency is absolutely necessary in Turkey until all the people who are linked to the coup attempts are found.
Yeah, I guess the question is, who determines whether academics are radicalizing youth? I mean, there should be a court system that should charge people who are breaking the law.
There is a court. The people who are being suspended will be those who are. Many have been reappointed. Some have been arrested. Those who have been arrested will be put on trial. There are many commissions who are watching the process. There are commissions from the main opposition parties. There are commissions within the AK party itself. There are commissions within the government, and there are human rights commissions, which are all watching this process. It is not just one person deciding who is being suspended.
Okay, let me bring Alexei in from Moscow. Alexei, of course, lots of changes taking place in Turkey, and another one of these fast-moving changes in Turkey is the normalization of relations between Russia and Turkey. You know, initially there was a war of words between Russia and Turkey after that Russian jet was downed near the Syrian border by Turkish fighter jets. But now President Erdogan has held a meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg. They appear to have patched up their differences. What do you make of the timing of this meeting?
The timing is pretty telling, because firstly it happens against the worsening relations between Turkey and the West. Firstly because of Turkish policy in Syria and their bombings of Kurds, which are supported by the United States, and of course the harsh crackdown against those who was behind the failed coup. So basically this meeting in St. Petersburg kind of showing to the West that both Turkey and Russia have alternative paths to go with. So that's kind of very telling in such context.
Zainab, what do you make of the meeting between the Turks and the Russians at this time?
I think that the meeting actually was being discussed before the coup attempt was made. There was a letter written to Putin, and there was discussion about having a meeting. The fact that Vladimir Putin rang up immediately after the coup attempt to condemn it is very telling. The problem that Turkey has with the West is not due to anything to do with the Kurds or a so-called harsh crackdown, which I totally disagree with. It's more to do with the way that many Western states dragged their feet, were half-hearted in condemning the coup. And this is not so much on the part of the government, but on the people, the part of the people. The Turkish people are extremely upset about this. They were able to reach their own conclusions. There are many things on the night that were televised from Western media outlets that have upset the Turkish people.
We're going to have to take a break. More on the situation in Turkey when we return. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back. We're talking about the continuing fallout from the failed coup in Turkey last month. Let's get back to our panel. And Alexei, when we talk about the warming of relations between Turkey and Russia, of course it has consequences, as we've just talked about, economic consequences as well as diplomatic. But what kind of consequences or implications does this improving relationship have for in Syria right now? Both Turkey and Russia are heavily invested in resolving the civil war in Syria. So what will the impact be?
So actually, you're absolutely right. So both Russia and Turkey already invested too much in Syria to radically change their current policies. So basically, another indication that there will be very small chances for that change is that the focus of yesterday's meetings was economic trade issues. Because actually, if we look at Russia-Turkey relations, before the November 2015 incident with Russian jet, there were no issues in sphere of economics, trade, business, tourism. So actually, there was no serious obstacles for that. The only obstacle is the political one. So actually, the political will of two leaders who decided finally to meet and to clear the table and to start all over again. And they started with quite logical issues like economics and trade, and because there are less issues there. But as for Syria, I think that firstly, at current state, Russia has sort of a more, sort of a stronger leverage over Turkey, because I would say that it is very likely that Russia will tie the progress of restoring economic ties with Turkey to some political compromises from Turkish side on Syria issue. So, and here it's important to point out main sort of fundamental disagreements between Russia and Turkey on Syria. So firstly, it's the fate of Assad. Secondly, it's the terrorist group's designation, so which group is a terrorist or not. Another issue is Syrian Kurds. It's a PYD, which is supported by both Russia and the United States. And also a very important issue of Turkey-Syria border, which Russia has been advocating for a long time that it needs to be closed. So these are four major issues on which two parties have to find some compromises. So I wouldn't expect any substantial changes, but rather it would be more or less gradual progress toward laying a ground for that.
Zainab, if we look at where Turkey goes to from here, and the investigation into the coup plot is continuing, Turkey has been pointing the finger of blame at Fethullah Gulen. He is a Turkish cleric who lives in the United States. And I want you to take a listen to what President Erdogan had to say about this. Let's watch.
How can it be, when we are strategic partners, that when we ask in the name of our country's national security to hand over someone, you keep on hiding and sheltering him in your country?
So there has been an arrest warrant which has been issued in Istanbul for this cleric, Fethullah Gulen. And there's been, as we just heard, talk of extradition, although a formal extradition request has not yet been made. Is this straining relations between the United States and Turkey?
It will, and it has done, and it will continue to do so. We must remember that Fethullah Gulen is somebody who fled Turkey in the 90s to avoid going to prison from a different government. This wasn't Erdogan's government. It was a completely different government. He was accused of plotting a coup, and he fled to America. It's not a great surprise to anyone that he is involved. Most Turkish people are 100% convinced that he's involved. There's great evidence to the extent that he is involved. If America is holds back on extradition, it will show a lack of faith, it will show a lack of trust. Turkey has been very willing and has sent people who have been proven ISIS terrorists back to Europe. It will extradite people to. So there needs to be a kind of a mutual understanding here.
Yeah, except the United States says that this is a legal process, and we require evidence before we can extradite someone. The evidence that you talk about, has that
They've been given the evidence,
yeah.
and they actually they have been given the evidence, and there is I believe there's a commission coming this week to discuss the matter. It may, I mean, again, it's the people's perspective here. We're not talking on the government level. I'm not talking from government level. I'm talking from very much a sociological point of view. The people would like to have Fethullah Gulen be given back, to be extradited and punished in this country, to be held accountable for what the crimes that they perceive him as having done and which he is being accused of.
Right, Mustafa, what are you extradited?
There are reasons to be skeptical about these evidences, so-called evidences, because it's primarily coming from the channels of pro-Erdogan media, and we don't have any ability to cross-check if these are facts or propaganda. And it's, as you see the critical journalists, if they are critical, even some Marxists who are criticizing the Gulen movement, they are being associated in this purge. And, people would be silenced. If journalists are silenced and they're, facing criminal charges, how could people be open in such polls? That is, and the polls are not, they cannot be evidence. And other evidence that is shown is about the testimonies of these coup plotters, and the initial days, the state-run news agency, Anatolia Agency, they published these photos and some other and online evidence, we could say, of the torture and heavily beaten officers, their names and faces, and then they realized that they did it in a nationalistic zeal in which they could show that how they are punished, these traitors are punished, and then they realized that this is counterproductive because they are providing evidence,
right.
And that's the only channel, as I said, what happened, we learn so far. So be skeptical.
I want to get back to Zainab for one other key point, and that is, and we only have about a minute, Zainab, we're running out of time, and that is, when we look at the events in Turkey right now, and we know that Turkey is hoping to join the European Union, do these events present anything of a setback for Turkey's aspirations? Because the EU has already said that Turkey has to revise its terror laws in return for visa-free travel, and Turkey's European minister said that's impossible. That's not going to happen. So, is it a setback in a certain way?
That's not going to happen. There's no way that the PKK will ever be revised as the terrorist definition used for the PKK or for ISIS or for the Gulenist movement will be revised. Turkey has the sovereign right to define terrorism as it sees fit within its own laws, if its laws are functioning in that way. As for Europe, I believe Mehmet Şimşek said, sorry, I'm misquoting, it's not him, it was another minister, said that rather than criticizing Turkey, Europe should look where it is in 20 years' time. And this is the general feeling in Turkey. Do we really want to join Europe right now? After Brexit, after what's happening with Greece, there's never been any guarantee, oh, Turkey, if Europe opens its doors, Turkey will go in. It's always been the chapters are opened, then there'll be a referendum, and the Turkish people will be asked, do they want to join or not join Europe? The Europeans' attitude that it is a done deal if they invite Turkey, that Turkey will come in, is not accurate, and this needs to be realized. Turkey has to address its internal issues, which have been going on for the Gulenist movement, has been involved closely with every single government since the late 1970s, not just AK Party. They've worked closely with the governments to help the governments, and it's only in the past 5 or 6 years that AK Party government realized that
Right.
they weren't actually working for the government, they were working for themselves. So these issues need to be resolved. They're issues that stretch back 40 years. They're not issues that stretch back 2 years or 3 years. They stretch back 40 years. They need to be resolved. They're deep-seated problems. If they can be resolved, Turkey can continue its progress towards democracy. And I think the people proved on the night of 15th of July how much they value their democracy, how important their democracy is for them. And I would like to give that message to the West, that the Turkish people died for democracy. This should give you some faith that what is going on here will be fair, free, and root out any kind of evil doings.
Okay, Alexei, final question for you, and that is, we're seeing this rapprochement now between Moscow and Ankara. How do you see relations between Turkey and Russia expanding in the months and years ahead?
Primarily, restoration of relations will be primarily focused on economic ties. So that what Mr. Putin promised to lift the ban on charter flights and Russian tourists, and promised to also lift the ban for working of Turkish firms in Russia. And also, I guess, I mean, as both leaders stressed during their press conference yesterday, that there will be this accelerated resumption of two major projects, which is Akuyu nuclear power plant in Turkey and Turkish Stream, which is the gas pipeline across the Black Sea seabed to Turkey.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.